As Foundation Director of the Science at Kings Park and Botanical Garden for 32 years, Professor Dixon has established its research capacity in the Conservation and Restoration Sciences Building, a group of over 50 scientists and graduate students. His programs emphasise science into practice and has been funded by 44 industry partners representing $24 million of research funding in the past decade. As a professor at Kings Park and Botanical Gardens since 2015, he's established new science partnerships, winning nationally competitive funding of $7.6 million and creating international networks for seed-based restoration and foundation chair of the Society for Ecological Restoration in Australasia. Professor Dixon was also named the West Australian Scientist of the Year in 2016. I know he's not here, but let's acknowledge the fact that this, as an eminent scientist that has given his time for this presentation, and hopefully we'll be able to get him on the phone straight after the presentation and ask him a few questions. So here he is.
Hello everyone, it's Kingsley Dixon here, Curtin University and the University of Western Australia. Thank you for the opportunity to present in a very short period of time an issue of great complexity but of major concern as we face a very uncertain future. And the title of the talk is Future Fire and the Future of Our Biodiversity. We live in certainly very challenging times. From the time of first contact, and the Ensign image that you see shows the bucolic image of Princess Royal Harbour, a small puff of indigenous smoke in the distance. What we've now done on these landscapes, though, is a radical change. This is part of the 10,000 hectare prescribed burn as part of a final backburning operation deployed on the Stirling Range National Park last month. These are major impacts. But we also face an even greater risk. The nation has now decided that our biodiversity is collectively referred to as fuel. We call nature a hazard. And as a result, there is a call to arms following the tragic and catastrophic fires in Eastern Australia for hazard reduction burning. This was the announcement just on February the 20th that almost the single terms of reference for the Royal Commission into the fires will focus on hazard reduction. This is a surprising oversight, as I will demonstrate at the end of this presentation, because in many cases there have been comments about the failure of the existing prescribed burning system. And for Australia, this is the image from last December. Australia was officially the hottest place on Earth. Eastern suburbs of Sydney reached almost 50 degrees centigrade. And these are major changes to the continental scale. These are the fires taken from the NASA 3D imagery on the 7th of January, showing the continent ablaze. And of course there have been many reactions to those impacts on the continent. But it's also interesting to hear people who were in the fire front, who survived the fire grounds. And you can pick up a lot of social commentary where, if you look at this person, Witaliba, that township was totally destroyed. They actually had 2 bushfires 2 months apart. They also had detailed and extensive prescribed burning, but with the advent of climate change, this does not get a major mention. Now, although human life and property is paramount and important to all of us, there are potentially major and catastrophic silent losers as we move down the pathway of prescribed burning. As Leslie Schultz last year at the Prescribed Burning Conference at UWA said, and he's a Nudju elder, Great Western Woodlands, that incredible last remnant of a once extensive system, we are the kings of extinction. He's referring, of course, to the European occupation of the country. I'll just draw your eye to the bottom bullet point that Australia is one of 7 countries responsible for half of the globe's biodiversity loss. We have done more to damage, inflict and deplete our biodiversity and our ecosystems than almost any other per capita place on Earth. And prescribed burning now sits as a major and potentially last major impact that is likely to simplify and remove our intricate and ancient ecologies, reducing them to something that matches a European vision of managed, safe landscapes. What does it look like? Well, here are images of prescribed burning. Top left is Moore River National Park. This is last September. This is a repeated image that you will see if you travel along the Swan Coastal Plain. The image you see on the top right is one is well known to many of the people at this presentation. A harrowing image, an Armageddon-like image of what was happening on those landscapes. And these are large areas, 8,000 hectare areas. Bottom left is flying into Perth, and in afternoons on any fine days from autumn, winter and spring, you will see the Jarrah Forest ablaze with multiple ignitions. And we can see this plotted from 1970 across to 2018. The area burnt with prescribed fires has skyrocketed over the background levels. We can see that now most clearly with this is this year's burn schedule for the southwest, $53 million, 200,000 hectares to be combusted. Many areas are over and above the 200,000 hectares. In our far north, we now have a 1.1 million hectare burn planned for the western parts of the Great Sandy Desert. We face an unprecedented attack on our biodiversity, on our ecosystems and on our landscapes. There is little science that supports the retention of biodiversity under such scenarios. And why is this important? We have cleared all but 30% of the southwest bioregion. We are called a biodiversity hotspot because 70% of its primary vegetation is gone, that we have a large number of endemic species, and as a result, the designation of hotspot is not something to applaud, but to take note that the hotspot needs to be protected, it needs to be cared for, and it needs science-based management. You can see that quite clearly in this image. This is taken up at Mount Benia Nature Reserve, opposite the Mount Basua Nature Reserve, that in a simple 10 by 10 metre quadrat put into that area, you can get an astonishing number of plant species. In fact, if you combine the Stirling Ranges with the Fitzgerald National Park, you have many, many more species than you have in the entire British Isles. Of course, the endemism levels, that is the mammals, the plants, the reptiles and the frogs that we have, are irreplaceable. Once they're gone for good. And what we've now found is if you look at that image of Mount Benia, in fact, if you go through the southwest, about 1/3 of our plant species and the 8,500 species in the southwest are highly sensitive to fire. That is, many of them are killed by fire. This includes favourites such as the brown boronia, many of the native blueberry family, the ericaceae, guinea flowers and so on. That is, they require periods to then rebuild and regrow and reach maturity to produce seed, which of course becomes more problematic as we go into drying climates. Today, we see these landscapes now being inflicted with increasing fire impacts. The number of wildfires, of course, can affect this, but the frequency of wildfires is certainly not the same frequency of these burn sites. And I thank Joanna Young. She will be talking to that image in a talk shortly. This led a group of scientists, led by Don Bradshaw and Steve Hopper, who's speaking, is also one of the authors, to compose a key review which came out in 2018, which was trying to understand for the Mediterranean regions of the world what exactly are those impacts of prescribed burning, because clearly they need to be understood. And what the review found
was that for all the 5 Mediterranean regions, which are all designated biodiversity hotspots, all designated as being the areas most likely to suffer from climate change than almost any other single bioregion on Earth, that biodiversity loss through imposed fire presents one of the major risks. For the southwest, the review highlighted the current pattern, 200,000 hectares, 6-year fuel ages, and highlighted that this is probably the most severe landscape impact since the agricultural clearing of the wheat belt areas and parts of the coastal regions. Importantly, the frequencies of these fires and the aseasonality will challenge species and ecological resilience. For many species, as we'll see shortly, this is up to 10 times the natural frequencies. The review found that long, unburnt sites are not only critical for many animal and plant species, but they in fact may harbour important new species yet to be found. A rapidly drying climate will also mean that the interfire recovery periods, where prescribed burning has been based on models from the 1960s, are much, much longer, and hence species are far more vulnerable to loss through repeated firing. And we highlight that the protective value of prescribed burning is uncertain, and there's very little focus on direct asset protection, as the target is the major focus. It concludes by saying rapid response and suppression capabilities are certainly worth exploring. So the key threats to Australian biodiversity, this is the national list of threats. It's informative to see that although invasive species are one of the key threats to our biodiversity, fire and fire suppression activities affect almost 60% of listed species. This is certainly high in the mind of the Federal Threatened Species Scientific Committee that I sit on, and certainly we are concerned that a push towards increasing the impact of fire and inappropriate fire is a major new threatening process. So what are the sort of consequences of fire? Well, the Stirling Ranges, which of course burnt last year, the prescribed burn that happened in 2018, we believe now impacted a very large number of threatened plants, 10 critically endangered, 7 threatened invertebrates. Importantly, the critically endangered montane heath and thicket ecological community, because of the number of fires on that peak, is potentially now the first recorded extinction of a threatened ecological community. The combination of wildfires and prescribed burning, and of course the subsequent fires this year and the backburning operations, mean that 1/3 of the park has now had very high frequency fire put across what was one of the great biological jewels in the global botanical and faunal crown. So what are some of the impacts of prescribed burning that we do understand from the published scientific literature? If we look at Carnaby's and its reliance on this plant, for example, Banksia sessilis, the old Dryandra sessilis, Muir found many years ago, Barry Muir, that although it flowers freely 3 to 4 years after fire, and so one would expect that you can then burn again at the 6-year fuel age, it only sets viable seed after 8 years. That's when Carnaby's relies upon it for its seed reserves. It actually reaches maximum honey production at 12 to 15 years. And this is what I got from honey producers, indicating that the ecological peaking of this system occurs at a much later time than you get for any other system. Importantly, if we look at the range of different plant species, here we see a range of Banksias and native heaths and sedges, the fire-free intervals to ensure that these keystone and framework plants are sustained and reinstated in the systems are certainly much longer than what the current prescribed burning regime would. If we look at fauna, Don Bradshaw found that post-fire recovery need after a fire was about 25.6 years before the species could be fully reinstated to survive another fire. Banksia woodlands, with the work by Wilson, shown to sustain the population of these animals, 20 to 25 year fire-free intervals were important. For the Mardu, the yellow-footed Antechinus, greater than 40-year unburnt forest. And for those of you that live with unburnt forests near your homes, you'll know these delightful animals will occupy your house. Many of those are now gone from systems. And Per Christensen in 1975, in the former Forest Department, wrote that this had become rare in areas regularly prescribed burn. And Nwaya, the western ringtail possum, and this is from the DBCA website, shows that 20-year fire-free intervals are necessary for the protection of this animal. Equally, if we look at the reptiles, all the numbers and the birds, the numbers certainly exceed 6-year fuel ages, and certainly these animals depend upon refugias, as we found in the 1960s when splendid wrens went extinct in Kings Park as a result of very high frequency prescribed burning combined with wildfires across the park. In a stylised fashion, what does this look like? These are images, these are plots of the range of various animals: quenda, mardu, quokka, possums, western grey kangaroos, time since fire. You can see western grey kangaroos are the great survivors. They migrate over long distances. But if we put the honey possum in there and put the 6-year fuel age system, you can see many species are in danger of being lost from that system. So what are the alternatives? I'm working with colleagues on investigating how rapid detection systems are possible. This is a new Japanese satellite that sits over the state, takes live images, and each of those red dots, particularly out in the wheat belt, which indicates farmers burning their paddocks, so it's very high resolution. Or you can see the 3 red dots on the west coast. They're prescribed burns with smoke pluming out into the Indian Ocean. We can rapidly detect fires using this system. Combined with a way of rapid detection, and this still needs refining, we're currently looking at how this can be used, combined with a far more effective detection and rapid suppression system, combined with more proximal protection of assets, we believe there's a real opportunity to turn the prescribed burning into something that is more focused, more capable of delivering a benefit. It's interesting, if you read this, National Aerial Firefighting Centre recommended that the fleet of 145 ageing aircraft should be upgraded. This was put to the federal government in May 2016. It was turned over to the states, who refused to fund it. And although there was a warning of hotter and more extended bushfire seasons in 2016, we finished up into the 2019-2020 season with a very limited aerial capacity. I'll just conclude with this image of one of the 18 ringtail possums that have been translocated into Warrangup Springs Nature Reserve, burnt in a prescribed burn in May 2017. This is a landlocked reserve on the estuary at Mandurah, houses on one side, estuary on the other. This animal, this young female, had no way to escape the fires. Our actions today determine the biodiversity of tomorrow. Thank you.